Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, home of the aggressive tiger bass. And today we've got some unfortunate news with the 5-acre pond. But before we get into that, we're going to take a stop by Cedar Falls, because it seems like 2 or 3 times a year, I get to witness something that's truly fascinating out here at the farm. And today was one of those days. So if you recall, a couple months ago when we were adding tilapia to the 5-acre pond, we added a few to a 5-gallon bucket and brought them over to Cedar Falls. And this year I wanted to add more than just a couple of tilapia. And the main reason for doing this is, one, they're really good at cleaning up the algae. But the biggest reason was because I wanted to make sure I had males and females so that they could spawn. And we had been seeing some spawning activity around the beach area, so I knew it was only a matter of time. And when I got out to the pond today, there were hundreds of baby tilapia hanging out around the female. And it's no surprise, tilapia are just like other fish in that they protect their young from any predators. But I'll have to admit, tilapia have one of the coolest ways I've ever seen of protecting their young. And if you look closely, you'll notice that a lot of those tilapia fry are hanging out right around the mouth of the adult. And tilapia are a member of the cichlid family and are known as mouth brooders. So let's take a dive underwater so we can get an up-close look at how the mouth brooding process works. So with these tilapia, it's very common that after the female lays the eggs, she'll actually gather them up in her mouth, and the fertilization process can take place, and the eggs can even hatch and turn into baby fry while they're protected inside of her mouth. And after they hatch, whenever she feels like they're in a safe environment, she'll release them and they typically school up and stay nearby. But what you'll see now is that the bass are starting to school around, and whenever she senses danger, she cues those little fry and watches hundreds of baby tilapia swim inside of her mouth for protection. And I don't know about you guys, but this is just incredible to me. Seeing something like this is a great sign of evolution, and probably hundreds if not thousands of years ago, the tilapia developed this technique so that they could protect their offspring from predators, and it could be one of the only reasons that they're still around today. And so the mother takes them to a different part of the pond, and whenever she finds a nice safe area, she releases all of them and then they form that school around her. But tilapia will do this where they carry the eggs and fry for about 10 to 12 days, and her breathing movements are really restricted, and she also can't eat during that time. And I've always known that this process was going on in the 5-acre pond, but this is the first time I've personally ever seen a mouth brooder, and another reason that I love this clear water in Cedar Falls, because you learn so much about what takes place under the water. So a big shout out to Mama Tilapia. That's a pretty incredible job that you have, and my hat's off to you. And you can also see that some of her colors are starting to come back. Since we added a tilapia to the pond, they all turned that ghost white color, but she is starting to get some of those vertical patterns back. And you know, another reason I think that the tilapia have to have this to survive is because those fry come out with that same bright white color, and they're also very slow compared to other fry, which makes them an easy target. But they're also prolific spawners and can spawn every 21 days with the right water conditions. So I think with the high volume approach as well as the mouth brooding, that's how many of these babies survive. And you can see the bass are even coming over to inspect and see what's going on. But now back over to the 5-acre pond, and we had some unfortunate news as I saw this big bass floating in the pond earlier this week. So I had to retrieve it and use the pit tag reader so we could identify which fish it was. Alright, it's 69722. 69722. And my heart sank when I saw the numbers, because this fish is the one we called the goat. And the goat was no ordinary fish, but had superior genetics and an incredible appetite, and in the first 2 years, she was almost 3 pounds heavier than all the other bass in the pond. But Daniel from Arms Family Homestead was the first one to ever catch the goat back during the Cedar Falls pond build. His fish is 5.69722. The biggest fish we've caught out here, and he's gonna name it what?
The goat.
Naming it the goat, I hear you. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty crushed knowing that the goat's no longer with us. It was one of those few bass in this pond that was almost guaranteed to be a 10-pounder. And every time we caught the goat, it seemed like it was gaining a pound or more. And one time that was 157%, which is incredible. But the strange thing is that we have no clue what happened to the goat. The first thing I did was check its mouth because it's common for a big bluegill to get lodged in there, which ends up choking the bass. But it didn't seem that happened. And after talking to the biologist, sometimes you can just have natural fish loss where these hotter temperatures just stress the fish out. So unfortunately, I can't explain this one, but you're going to be missed, big girl. Rest in peace, the goat. So naturally, over the past week, I've been walking the pond's edge, looking for any clues or signs of anything that may be harming our fish. And one thing I have been noticing for quite a while now is the abundance of snails that we have, and you can see they line the pond's edge. And we even have them over in Cedar Falls, as I was zooming in on them a few weeks ago while they were chewing on the lily pads. So the snails themselves don't pose a threat, but what often happens is that a snail will act as an intermediate host for different types of parasites. And usually what happens is the parasites start out in an egg form, and they're usually introduced to the pond through bird droppings, for instance the big blue herons that are always patrolling the shallows. But after the parasite eggs hatch, they infect the snails, and that's where they'll develop and even multiply. And the next step is for them to infect the fish. And then they mature within the fish, and whenever a bird or a human eats the fish, that's when the parasite's life cycle is completed, and they repeat the cycle with their new host. So the first host is the bird, then the snail, then the fish. But once they leave the snails, they either penetrate the fish through the skin, or they're eaten by fish, and they'll live and survive inside that fish as long as the fish is alive. But these parasite infections are fairly common in ponds, and sometimes they do result in the death of a fish. But most of the time it's hard to see the damage from these parasites because it's all internal, usually in the tissues and organs of the fish. And a lot of times fish like a largemouth bass or a bluegill don't die from any single cause, but it's usually something like a parasite leads to an infection, and then when a secondary bacterial or fungal infection comes along, that can result in the death of a fish. So I'm not saying that the goat had a parasite infection, but I want to do everything I can to protect these fish. And the best way to get rid of snails and parasites is by adding these little guys right here, and they're called a red ear sunfish, also known as a shellcracker. And hence they get the name shellcracker because one of their favorite foods to eat is snails. And since we have snails in both Cedar Falls and the 5-acre pond, we're going to be releasing multiple sizes of shellcracker here in both bodies of water, starting out with Cedar Falls. But one of the keys here to introducing them to Cedar Falls is I wanted to make sure that the bass didn't eat them right away. So I added 1,000 golden shiners, and when the bass were so full and couldn't take another bite, I dumped them in the shallowest part of the pond over here at the intake bay. But you can see there's a variety of sizes, and some of these little guys are small enough to get down in those rocks and boulders, and should be able to hide long enough to survive, because they grow really fast. So now we're headed down to the 5-acre pond, gonna put them here in this shallow area, and the little guys are off. And obviously some of these may get eaten, so we may have to come back and stock a bigger size later on to ensure they survive. Because as you can see, we have predators of all sizes here at the 5-acre pond, as we got some baby bass lurking around, looking for their next meal. And he seemed very interested, but it must not have been the right size for him. But some of the interesting things about a shellcracker is they get big really quick. They feed heavily on snails, and the way to tell them apart from a bluegill is the males will have a red ring around their ear flap, and the females will have an orange ring. And they mainly feed on snails and insect larvae, and have the same spawning habits as a bluegill, but they typically spawn out deep. So I hope these little guys get to work and help us solve our snail problem. So in one of our previous videos, I showed you this clip of a small snake swimming across our pond Cedar Falls, and it sparked a debate of whether or not a largemouth bass would eat a snake. And since there were people on both sides, I decided the best way to get to the bottom of it was to use our 3D printer and print out a snake fishing lure and see if a bass would indeed strike a snake. I think it turned out pretty good. It even has the treble hook attachments, and we also used a glow-in-the-dark filament so you can even fish it at night. So the first cast was to test out the action of it, and it passed the eyeball test, and pretty much looks like a snake swimming through the water. But before we fished it in the 5-acre pond, I decided to take off the treble hooks just so we could test it in Cedar Falls and see how those bass reacted. And I'm not gonna lie, as it was swimming through those lily pads, I knew it was only a matter of time before we got that big blow up. But as you've seen in this pond, these bass are really competitive, and when they think it's feeding time, they all go into attack mode. So we were able to get several strikes, and I think it's safe to say that a smaller snake should not swim across this pond. But I also wanted to test it out in the wetland filter with our smallest bass, Truman.
There he is.
And even though this snake is much bigger than him, he still decided to strike it. So after successful strikes in 2 different bodies of water, I decided it was time to add the treble hooks and see if we could catch a bass out of the 5-acre pond. And just a few casts in, we had one swirl right there at the bank, And then not long after that, some aerial assaults on the topwater snake. And I'll have to say one of the benefits of using 3D printed lures is if I lost this one, it would cost about 55 cents and only take about 45 minutes to make. Opposed to a $10 or $15 lure that would take a few days to get here. That's tough to beat. So we were having so much fun with the 3D printed snake lure, we decided to take it one step further and 3D print a full fishing rod and reel setup and use it to catch a fish. And you can call this one a micro fishing rod because the entire rod and reel fits in this small case. You got the individual rod segments at the top, and then once you open up the latches, you have all the individual components including the reel, and my personal favorite, the 3D printed bobber. And we use the ASA-CF filament, which is made for outdoor use and has the perfect strength and resistance for a rod. And this actually looks like a perfect entry-level rod for Oliver. I don't have to worry about him breaking it or dropping it in the water. If he does, we'll just print another one. And we got the line spooled up, and then added the bobber, which even included a bobber stop. And then a nice small container that holds your weights. Alright, now that we've got our full printed fishing rod and reel complete, let's see if it can catch a fish. We got Nate Makes with us out here today, and he wants to test out the fishing rod on one of these slab bluegills. It didn't take long. Check out that bobber. That's awesome. Got him.
Oh, this one looks cool too.
It's a big one.
On the 3D printed pole, son. Let's go, baby.
So now that the snake lure and the fishing rod and reel were a success, we wanted to try one last 3D print and build a smaller scaled down model of a project we have in mind out here at the pond. And as it's printing out, you can probably start to see that it's a water mill, and we wanted to test out a small replica version of a water mill here at the waterfalls in the pond because we've been working on a project to use a water mill that's going to generate enough electricity to power those underwater lights that are here at Cedar Falls. But the waterfalls are providing that free energy, we might as well harness it. But if you guys aren't that familiar with 3D printers, the beauty in them is that if you live in a remote location like this farm and you need some tools or parts, rather than buying them online or driving to a store, you can just print what you need. For instance, I needed to cover up my Garmin transducer so when I'm pulling the boat down the road, it doesn't get hit with rocks and debris. And rather than having to buy a cover, I just printed one out to the exact size that fit perfect. I also wanted to replace some of the cup holders in the boat and turn them into plier and tool holders, so we just printed out that insert that doubles as a tool holder. And BambuLab is also compatible with Maker World, and that's where I found all of these models, which makes it very nice because beginners can use this printer without having to learn how to model. But my favorite 3D printer is the BambuLab X1C because when it comes to reliability, quality, and speed, it's tough to beat. And BambuLab is currently celebrating their 3rd anniversary, and right now they have their best price on printers ever. So do me a favor and click that link in the video description and go check them out, and leave us a comment below on what you'd like to see us print next. So if you missed the last video, we moved the 300-gallon aquarium out to the shop. That's the former home of Bonnie and Clyde, Moby, and even Tiger. But I hadn't added any fish yet because I needed to cycle the water. And I also got this product called Quick Start, which will help add that nitrifying bacteria and get the tank ready. But I asked you all what we should add to this aquarium, and one of the popular comments was to move some of the prawns from the holding tank into the aquarium so we could watch them grow. And man, this tank is full of that green, fertile water, and you can see some of them prawns are growing fast. But we dropped some pellets in, then scooped them up, and I'm guessing we probably got 5 or 6 of them here in this bag. So now let's head over to the aquarium, and the first thing I want to do is acclimate them because I'm sure that water temperature outside is much warmer than this aquarium water. But there's a good look at them. You can see it's a variety of sizes. And after about 15 minutes, it's time to drop them in, and this little guy is headed straight for the bottom. Probably going to look for a hiding spot. Man, look at those big jumbo eyeballs. He's moving along fast. Alright, got another one dropped in. He's a little bit bigger and has even started developing those big pinchers. But I just find it amazing that they can go from this size at about 1 inch long to those big jumbo adult prawns in a matter of just 4 to 5 months. But now that we're adding them to the aquarium, we'll get an inside look at them and get to watch these little guys grow. And if you missed the last video, we had a new duo show up to the Eagle Tower. But this pair of ospreys have taken over the nesting site. And you can see the one osprey pouncing on the other. And in the last video, I mentioned that may be one trying to convince the other one to not be so lazy and go gather some sticks and help build the nest. But it turns out that's kind of part of their mating ritual. So I was wrong. But I did find it really interesting that the ospreys were taking over the nesting site this late in June, as most of them in this area will have already laid their eggs back in April and usually have juvenile ospreys by this time of year. But some of the people did comment and say that it's not uncommon for an osprey to lay eggs and have babies this late in the summer. But I have been enjoying watching them build the nest. They're bringing in some bigger, more substantial logs and sticks to help develop a nice basket around the outside edge of the nest. And their goal for this is just to keep those babies from falling directly off the tower. And by having that nice rounded edge and bowl shape to the nest, that should keep the baby safe. But these guys have been hard at it, bringing in sticks every day, snagging a fish every once in a while, mostly small bluegills. But I asked you all to help me name these two in the last video, but didn't see any names that really stood out or made a good fit for the two ospreys. So we're going to keep that open for one more week, and you guys can leave a comment down below on what you think we should name the two new ospreys. And I just happened to be scrolling through some nighttime footage and saw a little bit of movement here, and can you believe a tree frog has made it about 40 feet up the eagle tower into the osprey nest. Alright, back over here at Cedar Falls, or we might as well call it the lily pad pond this time of year. And I got my little sidekick Oliver out here with me today.
I found fish. I found fish, Daddy.
You found them, didn't you, buddy?
Yeah.
And you can see they're all schooled up, which means they're ready to eat. But we got a new addition to this pond that I got to introduce you guys to, and that's Mr. Turtle. And you can tell he came from the 5-acre pond. He's got all that old growth on his shell, which seems to be intensified when they're in that fertile water. But happy to see turtles in here. I think all those babies we added last year moved over to the 5-acre pond. He said, I'm out of here. Looking for a cave to hide out in. Alright, it's feeding time. We're about to add 2,000 of these adult golden shiners. And believe it or not, that'll only last these fish about a week. So as we watch some of these incredible topwater blow-ups, let's talk a little bit about the pond. So in the last video, we talked about not adding catfish here in Cedar Falls because of their incredible appetite and how much bait fish it takes and how much bait fish those guys can eat. But several of you mentioned other species of catfish that don't get that big. For instance, the bullhead catfish and some other species. And so I like that idea. And while they're not as common around here, I will be making a trip soon to try to add some new catfish species. Because after all, this is an aquascape pond, and those bottom feeders will only contribute. For instance, when we add the golden shiners, there's a very small percentage of them that don't survive and usually sink down to the bottom. And that's why having those bottom feeders is important, like the turtles and the catfish, and they'll consume those shiners, which will contribute to this ecosystem. And that's the beauty of the ecosystem ponds, is everything benefits something else. So the fish waste benefits the aquatic plants, as those plants feed off of it and filter out the water, and then those plants also produce oxygen, which in turn is consumed by the fish. And that's just a small example. But as you guys have seen, my favorite part of the ecosystem is the plant life filtering the nutrients out of the water, making it crystal clear, and that allows us to see the things like the tilapia spawning, and the mouth brooding, which was actually my first time ever seeing that. And we have hundreds of tilapia in the 5-acre pond, and all of this same stuff happens over there, and probably a lot more interesting things as well, but that green fertile water prevents us from seeing it, and in most cases even filming it. But I have a feeling with new technology and the advancement of underwater cameras and submarines that in the coming years we're going to start seeing a lot more of what takes place underneath the surface of the water. And not just in small ponds, but even rivers and the ocean. I feel like there's so much out there that we've only scratched the surface on. But for me, the knowledge is power, because the more you learn about the fish and the more you understand about what's going on underwater, and that information allows me to do things that could benefit the fish. For instance, if I did have some underwater live streams of the 5-acre pond, and I saw bass swimming around with visual signs of parasites, that could have clued me in on, hey, it's time to get rid of these snails even sooner, and who knows, I may even save the life of some fish in the process. So in the meantime, we're going to keep the cameras rolling, that is, until the bass jump up and knock them over. And one other thing I learned today, watch the air bubbles that exit the gill plate on this bass. That is an incredible amount of suction and power that these fish have when they strike their target. Alright, got a beautiful morning out here at the 5-acre pond. Let's cruise around the edges of the banks and see what's going on today. So in these shallow pockets, there's a variety of different bait fish, and I've always said the tilapia fry have the odds stacked against them, and you can see that this baby white tilapia is basically just a painted target and really stands out amongst all those other small fish around him. There's bluegills and other species mixed in there, but unfortunately for that little guy, he's got nowhere to hide. And I also got some more turtle news. If you missed our last video, we moved one of the original Ninja Turtles from the backyard pond and released him here in the 5-acre pond, and he swam off and I wasn't sure if I'd ever see him again. But look who hangs out right here at the feeder on the dock. There he is, and you can tell it's him because he's not scared of me. He lets me walk out on the dock. All the other turtles would have swam away, but he's just out here vibing, waiting for me to toss him some pellets. So I'm happy to see I still get to see the little guy. And we also got some baby threadfin shad. There's a really good sign of a good shad spawn. And the storm's rolling in, and I've been saying in every video, we don't get your average thunderstorms around here. When it decides to rain, it goes all out. You shouldn't see grass flying around like that in your average thunderstorm. But we needed the rain, so we're not complaining. It's even got the wildlife out moving around. Got the raccoon down at the creek, probably hunting some crawfish. Also getting a lot of rain at the new backyard pond. And we set the bluegill feeder out on the dock, and it didn't take the fish long to figure out the feeding schedule. We haven't seen a whole lot of bass, but there are some big jumbo bluegills. And I've yet to fish this pond, but that's something you should be seeing here really soon. Alright, time to catch a few of these bass and scan their pit tags to see how big they've gotten. The last time I was out here fishing, I caught the biggest bass we've ever caught out of here, weighing in at over 5.5 pounds right in front of that feeder. And that big girl bit the topwater frog, so we're going to be throwing it and the swim bait. And if we catch a bass that hadn't been caught before, we'll insert a new pit tag into it. We got him. Off that deep wood pile down there. This fish was probably sitting at about 11 or 12 feet deep. Down on the bottom. Nice one. That's what you want to see. Chunky one. And it weighs 2.75 pounds. Alright, this is one of the newly tagged bass named Delta that we tagged for the first time a couple months ago, but seems to be a pretty aggressive and fast growing female. That's what you want to see. Whoa! Man, I was pulling that one out of the water. Got him. Oh, get him through the grass. It's a good one. Alright, this one's been caught before, 570651. Weighing in at 2.57 pounds. Alright, this fish is named Excalibur, and another reason why I love keeping this fish database, because Excalibur was one of the original fish that we stocked into the pond, and I'd only caught him one time back in May of 23. So Excalibur evaded me for 2 years, and if you want to catch him, you're going to have to throw something that looks like a shad. Got him. Oh, this one's biting. That ain't like crazy. No giant. Little guy would put up a good fight. Oh, we got one that has not been caught. Alright, his new tag is going to be 2232611. Weighing in at 2 pounds even. Alright, this newly tagged fish is named Hoss, and you can see we added some new names to the list, as well as have a chunk of new open opportunities. So if you see a letter on that left-hand column that doesn't have a name, leave your fish name comment down below, and join the competition. Got him. Same spot as the last one. Camera's about to die. Alright, he's been caught, 570371. Weighing in at 2.60 pounds. Alright, this fish is named the Reaper, and it's the 5th time we've caught it. Also likes eating those shad style baits. They're about lily pads. Don't they? Nice one. Alright, this fish has been caught, 570060, weighing in at 2.16 pounds. Now this fish is named Okeechobee and one of those 100% Florida strain bass we added last spring. And I find this fish really puzzling. Its weights are all over the place. You can see it lost weight after that initial spawn, and then gained it all back plus some, and then now has lost it again. So I would have expected some better growth rates out of that 100% Florida strain. That's a topic we'll probably dive into here soon. Got it. It's a good one. This fish has been caught, 2232598, weighing in at 2.18 pounds, almost the same as last time. And this fish is named Ziggy, the 5th time we've caught it. And another fish whose weights are fluctuating a little bit. I'm going to pay really close attention to this, and it might be a sign that we need to remove some more bass out of the pond or add more bait fish. Alright, now let's check out the wildlife cams down in the swamp. Got some deer activity. Mr. Raccoon heading into work. Hey, there's a nice looking woodpecker with a big bright head, looking for his next meal. And there's Peter Cottontail. And there's a good sunrise shot of Mr. Longneck, cruising the banks. And if you want to know what the pond sounds like at night, this is it. Alright, now we got a fascinating story unfolding here at the squirrel house. The primary resident is Gus Gus the mouse. The daytime resident is Chip the squirrel. And we've also got Gus Jr., a baby mouse born just a couple months ago. But we've been having some new visitors lately. Anytime there's a bunch of mice hanging around, it's going to bring the kitty cats in. So he decides to post up in front of the door and work the day shift waiting on them to come back. It looks like it's bath time until that sun starts hitting him and he decides to take a little cat nap. Until the thunderstorm rolls in and he decides to take shelter. I never would have thought this would have turned into a cat house this high up in a tree, but nothing surprises me anymore with this one. And it looks like all the rain and thunder has got him ready for catnap number 2. So this cat spent the night and is starting to get so comfortable, I'm thinking he may not ever leave. But eventually he's cleaned up and dried off and decides the mouse hunt is over. And not long after that, Gus Gus returns. And we also have the occasional bird stop by. But speaking of birds, is it just me, or does anyone else have birds fight themselves on their vehicles? This little guy has been fighting his reflection, and it goes on for hours throughout the day. Alright, now let's go check in on some of those wildlife crops. And you can see as we get a little bit closer, right out here in the middle of the corn rows, we have some matted grass where the deer have decided to bed down, right here in the corn. I guess that's as good a spot as any. But the field of brown top millet is doing really good, and the birds are going to be happy because they're starting to produce a lot of seeds. Each plant can have hundreds of seeds, but we did a big variety out here this year with brown top millet, corn, sorghum, soybeans, and sunflowers. There's a good look at the sorghum mixed in, and the sunflowers over there on the edge. We should be seeing some flowers here in a few weeks. But there are signs that the deer have been munching. You can see they're eating on the corn pretty good. And this is that bedding area we saw from the drone. I don't blame them. Looks like a soft spot to sleep. So now let's head over to Liz's garden. She's got some planters with tomatoes growing in them. And they were starting to come along, but she got a little angry with these worms that are ruining all of her hard work. But speaking of worms and caterpillars, the oak trees are getting hit again, just like last year, where we had these caterpillars come in and eat every leaf off of one oak tree. But thankfully it recovered, but this year I'm going to have to spray these guys. Can't have the caterpillars killing all of our oak trees. Alright, we got Oliver out here. He decided he wanted to drive the tractor this afternoon. He's getting the hang of it pretty quick. But we had a little job for us. The pond dam banks were getting a little overgrown, so we attached the flail mower and gave it a nice trimming. If you're ever looking for a good way to cut a slope, this attachment is it. Alright, back down here at the half acre, the deer should be in velvet now, so we're going to feed them a high dose of protein with roasted soybeans and corn. Got the helpers out here today with me. And there's some bucks in velvet. It doesn't take them long to find the protein. Another little spike stopping by during daylight. Mr. Raccoon on his lunch break. You never know how these interactions are going to turn out. But we got a nice little group of young bucks this year. Oh, and a raccoon fight. And Chip and Dale have found the soybeans. And hey, look who it is, George Jones the possum. But Chip and Dale invited some buddies over. Looks like we got 4 squirrels out there now. And man, talk about a pregnant doe. 2 years ago we had triplets, last year we had twins. Can't wait to see what they have this year. And a battle between the squirrels and crows. Looks like the crows won. Alright, if you made it this far in the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along with all of our ponds, wildlife, and aggressive tiger bass. But I hope y'all enjoyed this one, and we will see you all next time.